As I teased the lesson a little earlier, my typical one-word titles, I couldn't find one for this lesson, so I just called it Take This Job and Love It. And I know that it was at kind of the expense of the famous Johnny Paycheck song, as I mentioned to you earlier, because he wanted to take his job and shove it somewhere. Although I always found it very interesting that Johnny Paycheck would be wanting to shove his paycheck. That never made any sense to me, but such as it is. Hopefully you've brought your Bibles with you. The text of the message this morning is taken from the book of Colossians. It's a New Testament letter that Paul wrote to the church in Colossae. Colossians chapter 3, verses 23 and 24. And as I've mentioned to you before, I hope that your Bible is something that you read every day. And I'm not talking about necessarily camping out for hours at a time. Maybe it's just reading a verse. Maybe it's just reading a proverb. Maybe it's reading a chapter. Whatever you do in terms of your own personal study. But simply coming here on Sunday morning and listening to me deliver a message to you, that's not the same as studying. Because we all study at different rates and different paces and different abilities. And so it's important for you to just get in the Word. So I would encourage you to read your Bible every day. Bring it with you here to church. And then now you know where to find Colossians chapter 3, verses 23 and 24. So Paul is writing to this church and says, look, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. So I want to try and paint a word picture for you as best as I can, and I want to contrast two particular workers. Is Ray back there? Are you hiding behind the screen? Right there you go. Thank you. I couldn't see you. Thanks for helping out. I want to contrast two workers for a moment. The first one is like slicing his hands through the air. He's making points. He's instructing the crowd. You can tell from his behavior that this person is a teacher. And it looks like he's a pretty compelling one at that. He stands on the beach and he renders the seashore essentially his amphitheater. And as he talks, his audience begins to increase. And as the audience grows, his platform is beginning to shrink from where he can teach. So the instructor starts stepping back and back until the next step will literally take him into the water. And that's when the teacher spots another worker. This one is a fisherman. And he's not animated like the teacher. He is clearly frustrated. He'd spent all night fishing. He had caught absolutely nothing. He had spent double-digit hours casting his nets, splashing them into the sea, pulling them back, but he'd caught nothing. Unlike the teacher, this particular fisherman has absolutely nothing to show for all of the work he had put in the night before. He doesn't draw any crowds, and the truth is he doesn't even draw fish. I mean, that was the problem for the fisherman. All he has is nets. And in this example, you have two workers. You have one who's pumped up, delivering a message to a crowd that is increasing and is interested in what that person has to say. You have the other worker who's just flat worn out. You have the teacher who is fruitful. The words that he says generates a response in the audience's heart. But the second one, he had spent all night and caught nothing. His job was a job of futility. And the question I was asking myself, and I would then ask you, is to which of those two do you more closely relate? If you empathize with the fisherman, as I suggest and probably suspect most of us would, we walk a pretty crowded path. Because I want you to consider just a few of these statistics. 1/3 of all Americans say the following: I hate my job. 2/3 of the people with whom you come into contact every day, 2/3 are in the wrong career. Now, there's plenty of people who find success in employment, but they don't find any satisfaction in the employment. Most suicides occur when? Sunday night, dreading Monday morning work. Most heart attacks occur on Monday morning. Lots of people dread the drudgery of their job. Countless commuters begrudge the roughly 83,000 hours that their jobs, our jobs, take from their lives. And if you're one of them, then the question is, well, okay, what do I do? Do I change my job? Well, I guess that's one possible strategy. You could do that. But until you change your job, how are you going to survive? I mean, you've got bills to pay, right? You've got obligations to meet. And I suspect that perhaps the problem is more the outlook and less the occupation. So before you change your profession, what I would suggest you do is to try this. Change your attitude toward your job. Jesus' words for frustrated workers, like all of us can be from time to time, can be found in the 5th chapter of Luke's Gospel. And there we encounter a teacher and the frustrated fisherman. And you've already likely guessed that the comparison of those two workers that I started this message with was a comparison between Jesus, the teacher, and Peter, the frustrated fisherman. And today, just random pockets of people populate the Galilean coast. But in Jesus' day, they swarmed the seashores. It was like an anthill of activity where Jesus was preaching that day. And Peter, Andrew, James, and John, 2 sets of brothers, made their living by catching and then selling fish. Like other fishermen, they worked the night shift. The idea being, especially during the summertime, that the cooler evening would draw cooler water, which would draw the fish to the top of the surface so they could eat bugs and whatever else fish are going to eat. And so typically their job in going out and fishing was the night shift. It started probably roughly at 8, 9 o'clock at night and would work until roughly 6 o'clock the next morning. And like other fishermen, they knew the drudgery of fishless nights because it would happen to every fisherman from time to time. And while Jesus is preaching, these fishermen, the 4 of them, are cleaning their nets. And as the crowd starts to grow, Christ had an idea. And Luke chapter 5, verses 2 and 3 says this. He noticed 2 boats tied up. The fishermen had just left them and were out scrubbing their nets. He climbed into the boat, that was Peter's, and asked him to put out a little from the shore. And sitting there, using the boat for a pulpit, he taught the crowd. Now, I want you to notice in that 2-verse passage the following. Jesus claimed Peter's boat. He didn't ask Peter if he could use it. He didn't fill out an application and submit for Peter's approval to use the boat in the future in the event these certain conditions existed. He simply boarded the boat and began to preach. And he can do that, you know, because Jesus owns all the boats. All boats belong to Jesus. And your boat, church, my boat, is where we spend our day. where we make our living, and to a large degree, where we live our life. That's our boat. So the taxi that you may drive, or the horse stable that you may clean, or the dental office that maybe you manage, or the family you feed and transport, that is your boat. And Christ shoulder taps us and reminds us, you know what, Randy? You drive my truck. Or, you know what, Randy? You preside in my courtroom. Or, you know what, Randy? You work on my job site. Or, you know what, Randy? You serve in my hospital wing. Or even this. You know what, Randy? Your boat is mine. To us all, Jesus says, your work is my work. Have you seen this painting before? It's called The Angelus, and it's by Jean-Francois Millet. I'm not a real artsy kind of guy. You know, I mean, I can barely make stick figures, but when I see good art, I like art, and so much about art is just one's interpretation. I mean, I can look at a picture, and you can look at a picture, and we come up with two totally different interpretations of that same piece of work. But in this particular case, the painting, as you can see, depicts two peasants who are bowing their heads in a field over a basket of potatoes to say a prayer called the Angelus, which together with the ringing of the bell from the church that's way back on the horizon marks the end of the day's work. And as you look at this painting, you will also notice that there are some rays of light that are coming through the clouds as the sun begins to set. And interestingly, if you take a look at this photo, you'll find that the rays of light are not coming through the clouds and onto the church. The rays of light are not even coming through the clouds and alighting on the heads of the man and the woman who have their head bowed in prayer. It's a little hard to tell. This was the best photo I could find for you. But if you take a look at a really good high-definition photo, what you see is that the rays of light are focused on the couple's feet. And at the couple's feet are a wheelbarrow and a pitchfork. And I find that remarkable because it ties into what I wanted to share with you this morning. God's eyes fall on the work of our hands. Our Wednesdays are every bit as most important to God as our Sundays. He blurs the secular with the sacred. One stay-at-home mom keeps this sign over her kitchen sink, and it says, I quote, "Divine tasks performed here daily." It's true, isn't it? A female executive I know has this plaque in her office, and it says, "My desk is my altar." And in that context, those two individuals alone, they're both correct, right? With God, our work matters every bit as much as our worship. Indeed, work in many ways can be worship. And I say that because Peter, the boat owner in our story, later writes the following in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9. You are a chosen people. You are a kingdom of priests, God's holy nation, His very own possession. This is so you can show others the goodness of God. So if you're thinking that, well, maybe you're going to get out of one job and apply for a new one, well, on your next job application, when they ask you your prior occupations, just write priest or priestess, because you are one. A priest represents God, and all of you here, this church does that every day in this community. We represent God. So let every detail in your lives, your words, your actions, whatever, be done in the name of the Master Jesus. Again, that's that Colossians passage we were talking about, Colossians chapter 3, verse 17. And if you want to stretch this just a little bit, then I want you to follow along with this, that you don't drive to an office. You're driving to a sanctuary, if that's where God is. Not here at church, but is God in your office? Honestly, church, as an aside, here's what I have to do. Because I am self-employed, like some here, I don't have a boss to report to. Yes, I'm responsible to my wife and to my family. I need to earn money to pay bills, but I don't have a supervisor to make sure that I'm staying on task. And if I wanted to, I could sit behind my office desk and play on my computer all day and search the internet for who knows what. I could do that. And occasionally, I'm tempted to do that. So the way my office is arranged, some of my clients can see it. Most of them know that I'm a Christian. Over my wastebasket, because it's kind of tucked away so I can see it directly, it says, and it's big 8.5 by 11 sheet, big font, Jesus is watching. I want to remind myself that I am responsible to someone, not a supervisor, not even my family, but I am responsible to Jesus. So I have this sign to remind me, Jesus is watching. And if that is true, church, then you're not driving to work. You're driving to a sanctuary of sorts. You don't attend school, you attend a temple. You may not wear a clerical collar, but you could because you're representing God. Your boat is God's pulpit. In Luke chapter 5, verses 4 and 5, it says the following. When Jesus finished teaching, he said to Simon Peter, "Push out into the deep water and let your nets out for a catch." Simon said, "Master, we've been fishing hard all night, and we haven't even caught a minnow. But if you say so, I'll let out the nets." You know, a patient getting a root canal has more enthusiasm than Peter. But who can blame Peter? I mean, his shoulders are aching. His nets are packed away. A mid-morning fishing expedition has zero appeal to Peter. Still, he complies. "I will do as you say and let down the nets." You get the impression, at least the way that I've just read it to you, that he's hardly hopping up and down with joy and excitement. But that's an encouragement to me, because what I discover from that response by Peter to Jesus lets me know that obedience doesn't always wear goosebumps. Right? I don't have to get all tingly to obey. I just simply need to listen to the words of my Lord and Savior and do what he says. "All right, Lord, I'll do as you say. I'll let down the nets." And so now, in the light of day, in the full sight of a crowd that has assembled along the Sea of Galilee, these fishermen dip their oars in the water, hoist the sail, and somewhere out in the middle of that lake, Jesus gives them the signal, apparently, to drop their nets. And verses 6 and 7 of Luke chapter 5 says the following. "It was no sooner said than done. A huge haul of fish, straining the nets past capacity. They waved to their partners in the other boat to come help them. They filled both boats, nearly swamping them with the catch." You see, Peter, Andrew, James, and John are knee-high in gills. The catch and the message of their lifetimes now literally surrounds them. And what is that message? Well, some say it's take Jesus to work and get rich. The presence of Christ guarantees more sales, bigger bonuses, longer weekends, and an early retirement. It's called the prosperity gospel. And with Jesus in your boat, as it goes, you'll go from Galilean fishing to Caribbean cruising. But if this passage promises that kind of prosperity, Peter missed the boat. Pun intended. The catch didn't catch Peter's eye. What caught Peter's eye was Jesus. Though surrounded by scales of silver, Peter apparently didn't see dollar signs. He saw Jesus. Not Jesus the carpenter, not Jesus the healer, not Jesus the miracle worker. Peter saw Jesus the Lord. A Jesus that was mighty enough to control the sea and kind enough to do that very thing from a fisherman's boat. Verse 8 says, Simon Peter, when he saw it, referring to the catch, fell to his knees before Jesus. Master, leave. I'm a sinner, and I can't handle this holiness. Leave me to myself, he says. And I'm thinking, wow, what a scene. Here's Jesus Christ, the Lord and Savior and creator of the universe, standing shoulder to shoulder with a cranky fisherman, directing fishermen how to cast their nets, telling fishermen how to fish, showing net casters where to throw. And the challenge for me and for you is, suppose tomorrow we do the same thing. Suppose tomorrow that you take Jesus to work with you. Invite Jesus to superintend your 9-to-5 day. He showed Peter where to cast his nets. Won't he show you where to maybe transfer your funds or file those documents or take the students on the field trip? Maybe your day is something like, Holy Spirit, help me stitch this seam. Or, Lord of creation, show me why this exhaust manifold isn't working. Or, King of kings, please bring clarity to this budget. Or maybe, dear Jesus, guide my hands as I trim this customer's hair. Pray the prayer of Moses. And interestingly, the prayer of Moses is contained in Psalm 90. And the excerpt that I wanted to share with you this morning is taken from verse 17. Here's what Moses prayed, that David then recaptures in a song. Moses says, let the loveliness of our Lord, our God, rest on us, confirming the work that we do. Oh, yes, Moses continues, affirm the work that we do. Maybe you do not see at all, and in any way, shape, or form, how God could use your job. Maybe your boss has the disposition of a hungry pit bull. Maybe hamsters have a larger workspace than your office cubicle. Maybe your kids get a better per diem than you do. You feel sentenced to the outpost of Siberia where hope left on the last train. If so, then I have one final witness that I want to share with you. His prison camp. The communist regime had rewarded his faith in Jesus Christ with what I will call the porta potty assignment, which lasted 6 of his 18 years in prison. And without becoming too graphic, let me just explain to you generally what I'm talking about. The camp itself kept the human waste of its 60,000 prisoners in pools until it fermented into fertilizer. Thank you. I mean, this place seethed with stink and disease. Guards and prisoners alike avoided the cesspools and everyone who worked there, including this particular disciple. And after he'd spent only a few weeks in the pit, the stench had literally pigmented his body. He couldn't scrub it out if he wanted to. And imagine his plight. He is far from home because he's been abducted, because during the communist overtaking that area, he had come from a wealthy family. He was educated and he was a Christian. So he was far away from his home, and he's in prison, and he's even far away from the prisoners with whom he's serving in prison. I mean, nobody wanted to associate with this guy. But somehow, this very godly man found a garden in his prison. And here's what he said: I was thankful for being sent to the cesspool. This was the only place where I was not under severe surveillance. I could pray and I could sing openly to our Lord. When I was there, the cesspool became my private garden. He then quoted the words to an old hymn that apparently you sang last Sunday, and we're going to sing after this message. I come to the garden alone, while the dew is still on the roses. And the voice so clear whispers in my ear, the Son of God discloses. And he walks with me, and he talks with me, and he tells me that I'm his own. And the joy we share as we tarry there, no one has ever known. I never knew the meaning of this hymn, he says, until I had been in the labor camp. His name is Pastor Chin Min Lin. And God, church, can make a garden out of the cesspool you may call your job. But if you'll take him with you. For Peter and his nets, for the prisoner in this garden, and for you and your work, the promise is the same. And that promise is everything, church, everything changes when you give God your boat. So I hope you found some encouragement in this. You know, I was on a brief vacation to get away from work. And so why I was writing a lesson about work is a little disturbing. But I thought, well, maybe work's not so bad after all. It just depends on whose boat I'm in. If I'm in my own boat, then yeah, it can be a little stressful. It can be a little difficult. There are times when I really don't want to be a lawyer because I have hard conversations with clients. I have difficult discussions with judges. I have judges who come up with decisions that I don't agree with, that affect my clients in significant ways. Of course, I have judges that agree with me, and they're the right ones, but I don't get my choice of the judges all the time. And yet, if I will remember that Jesus is watching, and if I'm giving him my boat, then he can make my boat his pulpit. And in that way, my life can be influential to the clients whom I serve, to the church with whom I worship, to the people with whom I come into contact, whether it's in a grocery store or whether it's at the office or whether it's at the bank. I mean, whatever that activity is, you know that if you've given God your boat, then he can make it a pulpit for the advancement of his word. So try that this week. Try taking Jesus with you to your 9 to 5. Try making him the superintendent of your job. Try dedicating what you're doing for the benefit of Jesus and see if that doesn't maybe change your perspective on how you view your job. You know, for most of us, we all need to work. So you're either going to like what you do or you're not going to like what you do. My encouragement is if you give Jesus your boat, the chances are you're going to like what you do a lot more than if you don't. So the song that I've selected for the invitation song is I Come to the Garden Alone. It's an odd selection for an invitation song, so to speak. But now that you know that Pastor Chen worked 6 years in a cesspool and could view that experience as the best possible outcome for him because he could sing loudly and pray loudly to God and then remember this song, it had a significant impact on his life, and perhaps it will be for you too. Let's stand and let's sing.